I once thought luxury could compensate for freedom. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. If you believe that living in a 30-room mansion in Palo Alto, being chauffeured around in a limousine and dining under crystal chandeliers is heaven, then you need to hear my story. My name is Isabella Carter, the only daughter of Philip Carter, CEO of Carter Dynamics, one of the most powerful tech empires in America. But behind those gilded walls, my childhood was nothing short of a life sentence, with no chance for parole. My father didn't raise a child. He molded a product. From the time I could walk, every step, every word was monitored and adjusted carefully, as if I were a long-term investment worth millions of dollars. I learned to behave like a lady before I could even tie my own shoelaces. Diplomacy lessons, ballet classes, speech training, all scheduled by the time I was 4 years old. No screaming, no crying loudly, no showing weakness like ordinary children. Those ironclad rules were etched into every breath I took. At 13, while my friends eagerly attended summer camps and sleepovers, I was locked in a study room with a private tutor, drilling SAT practice tests from 7 in the morning until 9 at night. "Isabella," my father said, his voice cold and sharp as steel. "The heir to Carter Dynamics has no right to fail. You will get into Stanford. No Stanford, no daughter." I nodded, my hands clenched under the table until they turned white, hiding the panic rising in my chest. At 17, I met the expectation. Accepted into Stanford Business School with honors scholarship. But the only acknowledgement I received from my father was a stiff nod at the orientation ceremony, as if I had merely completed another checkbox on his life blueprint for me. By 24, I was officially promoted to Director of Strategic Development for the West Coast region. A title that sounded impressive but, in truth, made me just another pawn in his cold business empire. I worked 70 hours a week, signed countless million-dollar contracts, but no one ever asked if I was happy. No one cared if I cried myself to sleep every night. The final piece of my father's master plan for my life was laid out at a family dinner on my 25th birthday. He placed a white envelope before me, his gaze leaving no room for protest. "This is your engagement to Levi Montgomery," he said coolly, sipping expensive red wine. Levi Montgomery, heirs to Montgomery Holdings, a handsome young man from a prestigious family and, most importantly, a perfect pawn in Carter Dynamics' expansion ambition. I sat there, frozen, my hands icy cold, while my mother, the woman who had never once stood up for me, smiled with satisfaction as if she had just sealed a lucrative deal. "Everything is arranged," my father continued, his tone as mechanical as reading out a contract. "The wedding will take place at St. Patrick's Church next June. Afterward, the Carter and Montgomery families will officially merge. An unstoppable empire." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table draped in white silk, to hurl that damned envelope into the roaring fireplace nearby. But I just sat there, silent, like a porcelain doll expected to smile, expected to nod obediently. I need time to think," I mumbled, my voice weaker than the cold, expensive windows. "It, proves that..." My father narrowed his eyes, staring at me as if I had uttered the most idiotic thing he had ever heard. "Isabella, you don't need to think," he said icily. "You just need to do exactly what I tell you. Don't disappoint me." The dinner ended in a suffocating, heavy silence. I stepped out onto the balcony, shrouded in cold mist, gazing down at the dazzling lights of Palo Alto below. The world was supposedly at my feet, but my heart felt utterly hollow. I wondered, if I truly plunged into this plan, living according to his script, would there come a day when I wouldn't even recognize the person in the mirror? In the distance, headlights streaked by, like blurred ribbons. And for the first time in my life, a terrifying but liberating thought crept into my mind. Maybe, to truly live, I had to be willing to lose everything. That Saturday morning, it poured rain like the sky was breaking open. I had just left another mind-numbing business meeting with the Carter Dynamics board of directors, my chest hollow and nauseous. My silver Mercedes-AMG sped along Highway 280, windshield wipers thumping uselessly against the suffocating storm. I just wanted to escape, at least for a moment. But even the car seemed to turn against me. About 10 miles outside Palo Alto, the engine sputtered and died. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, warning lights flashing crimson. Expensive car stalled in the middle of the highway, rain slashing down like whips. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, heart pounding so hard it hurt, feeling as if the entire universe was mocking my helplessness. With no other choice, I grabbed my coat and stumbled out into the downpour, hands trembling as I fumbled to call roadside assistance. Poor signal. One call failed, another failed. I stood there, soaked to the bone, teeth chattering, as cars hissed by without slowing down. After about 15 minutes, a distant truck horn cut through the rain. A battered blue tow truck pulled over to the shoulder. The door swung open, and out stepped a man in faded jeans and a blue work shirt smudged with oil. He wore a baseball cap, his wet hair plastered to his forehead, but his eyes, God, his eyes, were warm, like sunlight breaking through a gray sky. "Having trouble with your car?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. I stammered out an explanation, pointing to the blinking dashboard. He frowned slightly, then slid into the driver's seat to check. "Fuel pump issue," he said, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Nothing too serious, but it needs to be towed." I nodded hesitantly. His simple, honest demeanor was worlds apart from the cold, polished men I had always known. Men in $1,000 suits with icy handshakes and fake smiles. When the car was towed to a small garage tucked away on the city's edge, I followed him like a lost shadow. The garage smelled of oil, metal, and something oddly comforting. "My name's James Walker," he said, offering his hand. "You can wait in the lounge. There's a coffee machine, though it's not Starbucks." I laughed for the first time in months. A small, awkward, but genuine laugh. The lounge had only an old couch, a scratched wooden table, and a noisy automatic coffee machine. James handed me a steaming paper cup, and sat at a respectful distance, as if afraid to make me uncomfortable. "Never seen anyone show up at my garage in a Prada suit before," he joked, his eyes twinkling. I looked down at my soaked designer outfit and laughed again, louder this time, like a wave crashing through a broken dam. We talked about small things. California's erratic rains, roadside diners he loved, his dream to expand the garage into a vocational school for underprivileged kids. James never asked about my background. Never cared about the diamond ring on my finger, or the Chanel bag clutched against my chest. He just saw me. Truly saw me. "Life's too short to live it just to please others," James said, sipping his now cold coffee, eyes distant. "I had offers from big corporations, but it wasn't for me. I'd rather do something real." My heart twisted painfully. Half my life had been spent living according to someone else's plan. I looked up at James, a strange feeling rising in my chest, both painful and liberating. As if someone had just cracked open a long-sealed window. After nearly 3 hours, the Mercedes roared back to life. James refused to take anything beyond the repair cost. "Just promise me you won't drive alone in the rain next time," he said, smiling. I left the garage with the invoice in hand, but part of my heart stayed behind. The entire drive home I couldn't stop thinking about him. About the way he hurriedly wiped his hands on his jeans before shaking mine. About the honesty in his eyes, free from calculation. About how, for once in my life, I met someone who didn't want me to be anyone else. The following week, I found every excuse possible to return to the garage. Morning lights? Tire pressure check? Routine oil change? I even learned how to distinguish between a normal engine noise and one that needed a garage visit. All just to see James again. We drank coffee together at a scratched wooden table, laughing under the dim lights of the small garage. I told him about my silly childhood habits, scribbling behind wardrobes, hiding cookies under pillows. He shared stories about working late nights to pay his mechanical engineering tuition. No pretending. No performances. Just two people, bare, real. One late afternoon, as the sky burnt crimson with sunset, James spoke softly. Isabella, I don't know where you come from or if you belong in my world, but if you'll allow me, I want to stay by your side. I looked at him, my heart pounding wildly. No talks of money, status or fame. Just the pure desire to be together. For once in my life, I didn't need to think. I nodded. And I knew, from that moment, my life would never be the same again. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep playing the perfect puppet. And so, on a dreary Sunday afternoon, I stepped into my father's study, the silent courtroom of the Carter household for generations. My father sat behind his gleaming walnut desk, sunlight pouring through the glass windows onto his immaculate Armani suit. His eyes were ice cold as he looked up at me, as if he had already predicted the foolishness I was about to utter. I took a deep breath, clutching the paper in my hand so tightly that my nails dug into my skin. Father. My voice trembled slightly, but held firm. I cannot marry Levi Montgomery. Silence. The kind of heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a devastating storm. He slowly curled his fingers, tapping them against the polished surface of the desk. Explained. Just one word, sharp as a blade. I looked him straight in the eye, refusing to flinch. Because I loved someone else, I said, and when the name left my lips, it felt like breaking the invisible chains that had bound me for years. I love James Walker. The air in the room thickened until it was almost impossible to breathe. My father's face flushed crimson, then turned a terrifying shade of purple, as if his blood vessels were about to burst. A damn mechanic! He roared, leaping to his feet, the chair screeching loudly. You intend to disgrace the Carter name, Isabella. I stood my ground. She's not just a mechanic, he's the only one who's ever truly seen me. Not as an investment in your portfolio. My father slammed his hand onto the desk, the sound echoing against the trophy-lined walls. Listen to me, Isabella, he hissed through gritted teeth. You will marry Levi as planned. If you refuse, forget your inheritance, your position at Carter Dynamics, and your place in the Carter family. I bit my lip so hard it almost bled. But my decision was made. Then, I renounce it, I whispered, lifting my chin, my voice no longer shaking. I choose love. I choose freedom. My father froze, disbelief etched across his face. Then he let out a hollow, cruel laugh that bounced off the marble floors. You'll regret this, he spat, each word like a nail hammered into a coffin. You'll come crawling back to me. I said nothing. I simply turned and walked away, leaving behind his furious roars and the shattering of a crystal glass against the wall. My mother, who had spent her life remaining silent in the face of injustice, stood halfway down the staircase, her eyes brimming with tears but her mouth refusing to open. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I would crumble. That night, I packed my belongings. One battered silver Samsonite suitcase, a few changes of clothes, some books, and a small framed photo of me and my mother, from happier, long-forgotten days. My credit cards were frozen the moment I stepped out of the Carter estate. My bank accounts locked. My phone line. Everything in my world, status, wealth, reputation, suffocated with a mere nod from my father. James picked me up at a gas station on the outskirts of the city in his beat-up pickup truck. When I climbed into the cab, soaked to the skin from a sudden downpour, he simply handed me a dry towel, without a single word of pity or judgment. Are you sure? James asked, his voice low and rough. I nodded, rain and tears indistinguishable on my cheeks. More sure than anything else in my life. We drove through the dark streets, past flickering neon signs, wrapped in silence. Finally, the truck pulled up outside an old apartment building on the outskirts of Palo Alto. James's apartment was barely 500 square feet, with a leaking ceiling and warped wooden floors. The old iron bed creaked with every movement. The living room had only a worn-out armchair and a makeshift coffee table crafted from a shipping crate. But there, for the first time, I found something the Carter mansion never gave me. Peace. James spread a thick blanket on the floor for me. Not fancy, he smiled, his brown eyes twinkling under the dim yellow light. But it's home. I sat beside him, clutching a cup of hot cocoa he had made using an old kettle. The sweet scent of cocoa filled the chilly air, warming me deep to my core. "Are we going to be okay?" I whispered, the words almost dissolving into the quiet night. James pulled me into his arms, his warm hand wrapping around me like an unspoken vow. "No amount of gold or silver can buy what we have, Isabella," he whispered. "Just trust me. Trust in us." And under that leaking roof, with the rain softly falling outside, I realized I had lost the entire world. But in return, I had found myself. I thought the nightmare ended when I left the Carter estate. But I had underestimated the vicious stubbornness of my family. They wouldn't leave me alone. They wouldn't allow me to disappear from the world they had painstakingly crafted. Just 3 days after I moved into the small apartment with James, the storm began. The old phone James had given me for emergencies rang non-stop, numbers flashing relentlessly. When I didn't pick up, the messages poured in. From my mother, from the family attorney, even from my father's personal assistant. "Isabella, you must come home immediately. This is an order. Isabella, your father has been hospitalized with a heart attack. If you have any conscience left. Isabella, we can negotiate, come back, we'll discuss everything." I read those words, my hands trembling. Not from emotion, but from fury. Even when trying to lure me back, they used the same dirty tactics: guilt, threats, and bribery. That evening, when James returned home from a long shift, I showed him the messages. He said nothing, just squeezed my hand, his gaze pouring silent strength into me like no spoken comfort ever could. The next morning, we woke up to heavy pounding on the door. When James opened it, there stood my mother. Victoria Carter. In an expensive cashmere dress. Standing awkwardly in the narrow run-down hallway. She clutched her handbag tightly, her carefully made-up face twisted in a mixture of anger and worry. "Isabella," she said, her voice sweet like honey but her eyes burning, "are you really planning to live like this? In this filthy hole, with a mechanic?" I clenched my fists to stop myself from bursting into tears out of humiliation. James stepped in front of me, polite but firm. "Mrs. Carter, if you're here to insult us, please leave." My mother shot him a dagger-like glare, then turned back to me, forcing a stiff smile. "My dear," she softened her tone. "Come home. Your father has arranged everything. A new penthouse in downtown. A brand new Bentley. An unlimited credit card. And Levi is still willing to forgive you." Every word stabbed into my chest like needles. I let out a cold, slow laugh. "What you just described, Mother, isn't love. It's a gilded cage." My mother's face went pale. She hissed through gritted teeth. "You'll regret this, when he leaves you, when you're starving on the streets." James tightened his grip on my hand, anchoring me through the storm. I stared straight into my mother's eyes, steady for the first time in my life. "I'd rather starve than live a life where even my soul doesn't belong to me." She spun on her heels, her stiletto slamming so hard on the cracked wooden floor that it echoed loudly. When the door slammed shut behind her, the apartment fell into deep silence. James pulled me into his arms, his hand gently stroking my hair. "You're very brave," he whispered. But I knew. The storm was far from over. 2 days later, when I arrived at the small office where I worked as a freelance business consultant, I was stopped at the door. "I'm sorry, Isabella," the manager said, avoiding my eyes. "We have to terminate your contract. Some major clients applied heavy pressure. We can't afford the risk." I stood frozen. I didn't need to ask who was behind it. That evening, I found a large envelope shoved through our door. Inside was a contract: return to the Carter house, cut ties with James, regain all my assets, and receive a $6 million bonus. A scribbled note in red ink beneath it. Last chance. Held the contract, a mix of sorrow and contempt surging in my chest. When James came home, I burned the entire stack of papers in the old fireplace. The flames roared, consuming not just the papers but an entire rotten past I had chosen to leave behind. James said nothing. He just sat beside me, watching the flames dance until they collapsed into ash. That night, we curled up together on the rickety old armchair, without grand promises, without extravagant dreams. There was only one truth that echoed in my heart. I had made my choice. I had lost everything. And I had no regret. Our wedding took place on a crisp Sunday morning in late autumn, with golden leaves blanketing the paths around Willow Creek Park. No designer gown. No grand cathedral. No symphony orchestra or endless streams of white silk, like the weddings my parents once forced upon me. Just me, James, a few close friends, and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The wedding dress I wore was a simple white one grabbed from a clearance rack. No crystals, no lace. James wore a rented suit, his seamule tie slightly crooked from tying it himself. And despite everything being humble to the point of clumsiness, I had never felt more beautiful. As the music played, I linked arms with a close friend, the one who stood in for the father who refused to walk me down the aisle. My heart pounded so hard it threatened to burst from my chest. James stood waiting under a canopy of wildflowers, his gaze shining so brightly that nothing, not a fortune in dollars, not a fleet of supercars, not a mansion, could ever compare. But at that very moment, amid the breeze and the soft laughter, I saw them. Vi's parents, Philip Carter and Victoria Carter. They stood apart from the crowd, outside the flower-strewn lawn, their faces cold and rigid as statues. My mother wore a dark Chanel dress, her lips blood red. My father wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his sharp eyes piercing the distance. My heart clenched. James noticed. He squeezed my hand lightly, his eyes silently asking, "What do you want to do?" I took a deep breath. I knew this was the moment of reckoning. The ceremony began. We exchanged simple vows. I choose you through richness or poverty, through health or sickness. No promises of being a great boss, no promises of grand castles. Just a promise to stay together, no matter what. Applause erupted as we shared our first kiss as husband and wife. I turned my head toward my parents. They were still standing there, motionless, like two ghosts from the past. When the simple wedding reception began, just a few wooden tables, cold beers, and dishes lovingly prepared by friends, my parents marched straight toward us, their eyes sharp like twin blades. "Isabella," my mother spoke first, her strained smile on the verge of shattering. "You can stop this madness. The marriage can be annulled. Levi is still willing to forgive you. You only have to say the word." I gripped James's hand, feeling the peace of his warmth, like a torch in the middle of a storm. My father wasted no time. "This is your last chance. Leave that mechanic. Come home. Or do you intend to spend the rest of your life in poverty and shame?" All eyes in the park turned toward us. I could feel the collective breath-holding of our friends, the ones who had witnessed my struggles over these many months. I released James's hand and stepped forward. My voice rang out, clear, unwavering. "I have spent half my life trying to please my parents, seeking approval, longing for love." I stared straight at my father, then my mother, their eyes as frozen as a winter lake. "But today, I choose myself." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to stop her. "James loves me not because I'm Isabella Carter. He loves me simply because I am me." I choked up, but forced myself to continue. "And if today's choice is between a life of pretense and a love that's real, then I'm sorry. I don't need wealth, power, or fame." I turned toward James, my eyes full of emotion. I need him. A quiet explosion erupted in my heart. A blast of pure liberation. My father's face turned ashen, his lips trembling with fury. You'll be erased from the Carter family tree, he roared. You won't see a single cent of inheritance. I smiled softly. A name doesn't define a person's worth. A check can't buy freedom. My mother stood, paralyzed. Then she grabbed my father's hand, stammering, "Let's go, Philip. There's nothing left to say." I watched them turn and walk away, their silhouettes crumbling under the amber light of the autumn afternoon, disappearing behind the fiery trees. James moved beside me, pulling me into a fierce embrace, as our friends erupted into heartfelt applause. Not for wealth, not for fame, but for love and courage. I lifted my head, gazing up at the flawless blue sky. That day, I lost everything. Family, fortune, and part of my past. But at that same moment, I knew I had gained something far more precious. Freedom. Life after our wedding was filled with simple days, overflowing with laughter. That rickety little apartment with its peeling walls and creaky wooden floors was the first true home I ever had. James continued working at the old garage, while I picked up more consulting projects for small businesses in the area. Everything was peaceful, until the day everything changed. It was a Friday afternoon when I finished work earlier than usual. I stopped by our favorite Thai place to pick up some pad Thai, James's absolute favorite, as a little surprise. But when I got home, the living room was empty, and a hastily scribbled note lay on the table. "Running an errand, back late. Love you. My heart clenched. James was never vague like that. In recent weeks, he had also been disappearing at odd hours and his phone rang incessantly, though he always rushed to decline the calls. A growing sense of unease churned in my chest. Unable to resist, I decided to bring dinner to the garage like usual. But when I arrived, I froze. The garage was closed. The lights were off. James's old pickup truck was nowhere in sight. I called his phone. 3 times, 4 times. Every time, the same cold message. "The subscriber is not available." Just as panic started to tighten its grip on me, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Walker, please come to 4500 Crescent Bull immediately. This concerns your husband." My hands shook as I punched the address into my GPS. It led to the tech district north of San Jose, where billion-dollar corporations reigned. Heart pounding, I sped through the streets, horrific scenarios flashing through my mind. An accident? A hospital? Or worse? But when I arrived, I couldn't believe my eyes. Before me stood a gleaming skyscraper, its glass facade shimmering under the setting sun, with bold letters etched across the front. "Walker into his office." A polite security guard escorted me to the top floor via a private elevator. Every step felt heavier than the last. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into an expansive office surrounded by glass walls, a soaring ceiling, and polished walnut conference tables. A man in a flawless gray suit stood with his back to me, gazing out over the city awash in golden light. "James?" I called out, my voice raw. The man turned around, and I barely recognized my husband. Gone were the faded jeans, the oil-stained t-shirts. In their place stood James, in a sharply tailored suit, hair neatly styled, carrying the aura of a world-class CEO. He smiled and walked toward me. "Hello, Isabella," he said, his voice deep and warm, though tinged with nervousness. "I think it's time I told you the truth." I stood, frozen. Before I could respond, the office door burst open again. And just like a recurring nightmare, my parents stormed in. My father, Philip Carter, stood pale, fists clenched tight. My mother, Victoria, clung to her expensive handbag as if it were her last lifeline. "What the hell is going on here?" my father roared, marching straight toward James. "Why is my daughter standing in the office of a damn mechanic?" James smirked slightly. Apologies, Mr. Carter, he said, his voice polite but sharp as a blade. I forgot to introduce myself. I am James Walker, founder and CEO of Walker Innovations, the leading company in next-generation electric battery technology. A long silence stretched for nearly a full minute. My mother staggered, grabbing the edge of the table for support. My father's face turned crimson, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. No. Impossible, he stammered. You're just a mechanic. I had you investigated. James chuckled softly, a sound that sent chills down my spine. That's right, he nodded. At first, I owned a chain of small garages, built from a college loan. But 5 years ago, I founded Walker Innovations. Today, our company is valued at $118 billion. I stood there, mouth agape, unable to speak. James turned to me, his eyes gentle. I didn't tell you from the beginning, he whispered, because I needed to be sure you loved me. For me. Not for any number. Tears welled in my eyes. James had chosen to live as an ordinary man, leaving behind glory to test my heart. And now, with the truth laid bare, I loved him more than ever. My father, like a drowning man clutching a rotting plank, spoke up. Walker Innovations, we could collaborate. Our families could become strategic partners. James smiled, but it was colder than the Alaskan ice. Sorry, he replied. My family now consists only of Isabella, and we don't need you. I tightened my grip on James's hand. We walked out of the office, leaving my parents behind, small, bewildered, powerless, in a world they once thought they controlled. That day, I didn't just find the truth. I found justice. And once again, I chose love. Not for the glamour, but for the pure soul standing beside me, defying all the false glory. We had barely stepped out of the lobby of Walker Innovations, still catching our breath, when my phone began vibrating relentlessly. Messages. Missed calls, over and over. The senders. Mother, father, father's personal assistant. Only a few hours earlier, they had coldly cast me out of their lives like defective merchandise. Now, or rather the daughter who married a billionaire, suddenly became an irreplaceable gem in their new master plan. I ignored them all, squeezing James's hand tighter, feeling the silent, unwavering strength he poured into me. We headed home, to a small house we had just rented near Palo Alto, not grand, not showy, but filled with laughter and peace. That night, while we were eating pizza on the floor, the doorbell rang. I hesitated. James gave a small nod, signaling, "Go ahead. I'm right here." I opened the door. And, unsurprisingly, there they were, my parents. Philip Carter no longer looked like the untouchable titan he once was. He looked like he had aged 10 years in less than a day, dark circles under his eyes, slumped shoulders, and clenched fists trying to swallow bitterness. Victoria Carter wore a plain, neutral dress, her face pale, as if she hadn't slept for days. "Isabella," my mother spoke first, her voice hoarse, her eyes wet. I miss you." I stood rooted to the spot. If this had been before, I might have burst into tears and run into her arms. But today, I simply looked at them, calm and detached, as if they were two strangers who had lost their way. My father cleared his throat, forcing a crooked smile. A sight I had never seen before. "My daughter," he said, trying to sound warm. We were too rigid, but now, we see. We only want what's best for you." Said nothing. James stepped beside me, his gaze sharp, wary. My mother immediately seized the moment. "James," she said sweetly, her voice dripping like honey. We had a rough start. But please give us a chance to make things right." I almost laughed aloud. Make things right? Right what? The months they threatened, cut off support, hired lawyers to pressure the small firm I worked for? The contracts they sent trying to force me to silently file for divorce? The insults hurled at James just because he wasn't seated atop a financial throne? James squeezed my hand, his touch grounding me, keeping my anger from overflowing. "We harbor no ill feelings," my father continued, his stiff face struggling to appear sincere. "Walker Innovations could be a wonderful opportunity for our two families." My mother nodded eagerly. "Exactly. With Carter Dynamics' new projects and Walker Innovations' battery technology, we could achieve greatness together." Finally, the masks fell. It wasn't love. It wasn't remorse. It was grief. They saw blood ties as a bridge to billions of dollars. I swallowed the burning rage in my chest, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. "Let me get this straight," I said, locking eyes with my father. "You want to reconcile only because James is the CEO of a billion-dollar company?" No one answered. Their silence spoke volumes. James turned to me, his gaze warm but firm. "You owe them nothing," he whispered, as if anchoring my spirit. "You have the right to choose." I looked back at my parents, the ones who had once crushed me without mercy, and I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steady, each word carving through the air like a blade. "I already have a family of my own now, and in this family, there's no room for manipulation." My father stood frozen, his fists clenched so tightly the knuckles turned white. My mother let out a small sob, tears streaming down her face. "Isabella," my mother whispered, her hand trembling as she reached out. "Do you really want to cut ties like this?" I nodded. "I choose love. Not money. Not power." I stepped back, putting a world of difference between us that could never be bridged. "And if that means losing everything, I accept it." James pulled me close, standing like a fortress against the storm of greed and deceit. There was nothing left to say. My parents turned away, their hunched figures fading under the dim hallway lights, like two defeated strangers retreating from a war they had long lost. I stood there for a long time, feeling each strong beat of my heart. No more fear. No more regret. I had lost my old family, but I had found something far more precious. A new family. A free life. And a love that could never be bought. Life after that night didn't become easier, but it became real, more real than anything I had ever known. James and I didn't buy a mansion. We didn't splurge on luxury cars. Instead, we chose a small house on the outskirts of Mountain View, with a backyard full of wild daisies and a rickety wooden swing that creaked whenever the wind blew. We sat together every morning, sipping coffee from chipped mugs, reading newspapers instead of scrolling on our phones, laughing over little things I had once thought I'd never dare to dream about. James still spent his Saturday afternoons working at his old garage. He taught the neighborhood kids how to change oil, fix brakes, and check engines. Their eyes lit up every time they caught a signal from the old diagnostic machine, and James? He never looked happier. As for me, I started small again, slowly rebuilding my career. This time, without the Carter name weighing me down. I opened my own consulting office, helping young entrepreneurs build their business plans without selling their souls to corporate giants. But the most beautiful thing James and I built together was the Walker Foundation. We used a small portion of our wealth, just the annual interest was enough, to create a scholarship fund for underprivileged children, for dreams that had been crushed just like mine once were. No grand launch parties. No media fanfare. No need for applause. Just the sparkle of hope, in the eyes of boys and girls, giving a real chance at life. One afternoon, as James and I were sorting through scholarship applications under the soft yellow glow of our living room lamp, he suddenly placed his hand on my stomach. "I think it's time we grow our little family," James whispered, a warm smile blooming on his face. I laughed, tears glistening in my eyes. "Yeah, nice family. Not those bound by blood but willing to sell you out for power. Grandma was meant for me too." family meant the ones who chose to stay, chose to love, chose to build a future together. Sometimes, my mother still sent long letters, filled with news of lavish parties, investment opportunities, and suggestions about reconnecting. I read them, then folded them away into an unlocked drawer. I no longer hated them, but I wasn't going back either. Because I finally understood. Forgiveness does not mean allowing someone to destroy your life again. Every time I passed the towering skyscrapers lit up against the night, where men like my father still raced for numbers, I simply smiled to myself. I no longer belonged to that world. It belonged to winter mornings, tucked under warm blankets, hearing James whisper, "Good morning." It belonged to late nights, carefully packing books for children who were finally getting to go to school. I belonged to simple but everlasting moments. Once, as I was watering the plants on our porch, an elderly neighbor shuffled over with his cane. He looked at me thoughtfully and said, "Young lady, someone once told me, happiness isn't about how much you have. It's about knowing when you have enough. You're living proof of that." I smiled, tightening my grip on the watering can. No throne. No false spotlight. I, Isabella Carter, or rather, Isabella Walker, had chosen my own life. I had lost one family. But I had found an entire world. A world where love, simple, genuine love, triumphed over every prejudice and every scheme. As night fell, I leaned my head against James's shoulder, gazing up at the sea of stars over our old roof. And I knew no amount of money could ever buy this moment. We had built everything from scratch, not with money, but with faith. And that, to me, was the greatest victory of all. Isabella's story reminds us that true worth lies not in wealth or fame, but in the courage to live true to our hearts. She gave up a powerful family, everything she once thought was her whole world, to build a simple yet meaningful life with James. In today's calculating world, pure love, kindness, and freedom have become the most precious treasures. Isabella proved, sometimes, losing everything is exactly how you find it all. What do you think about Isabella's brave journey? Would you dare to give up everything to choose freedom and true love? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring family stories. I sat silently at the far end of the dinner table, next to a tray of untouched pumpkin pie. Across from me, my father's face was flushed red. He had just finished his third glass of wine, his shirt collar askew like the rest of his half-hearted attempt at preparing for Thanksgiving. In that brief moment of stillness, when the sound of silverware faded, he spoke with a hoarse, shaky voice. "I'm in debt to some really unpleasant people." The kitchen froze. My mom slammed her mashed potato spoon down on the table, making a sharp, dry sound. My brother Nick raised his eyebrows, then immediately glanced at me. An unspoken cue we've rehearsed for years. My turn to fix everything. I sat there, chest tightening. The only sound left was the relentless ticking of the wall clock, pounding in my skull. "I thought you promised no more gambling," I said, trying to keep my voice even, though my insides were burning. Dad didn't look at me. He stared into his empty glass, slowly twisting it in his hands. "I need about 14,000. By Monday." Mom jumped in smoothly, her voice sweet as syrup but no less staged. "Harper, you're not married, you don't have kids, and you live alone. You don't really have any big expenses, right?" I looked up at her and gave a tight smile. That "no husband, no kids" line was her favorite double-edged sword. Half pity, half a push to cast me as the family's bottomless wallet. "You mean, because I didn't get married, I should be the one paying off Dad's debts?" "We just thought you're a little more comfortable than the rest of us," Nick chimed in, spinning his beer can like it was some casual conversation. "I mean, that apartment you're renting, it's not exactly luxury." I clenched my teeth, forcing down the lump of fury in my throat. They had just insulted my one-bedroom apartment, then turned around and asked me for an amount that could have covered a full year of rent. "That car of yours must be worth something," Mom added, like she'd found the answer to a riddle. That hybrid SUV, you could sell it and probably have just enough, huh? I set down my fork and knife, every movement slow and deliberate. I bought that car after 8 years of working non-stop. Paid for every dollar myself. I save every month just to keep up. And that money Dad needs? It's to pay off loan sharks. You make it sound like we've never sacrificed anything for you, Dad snapped, lifting his eyes to meet mine for the first time. Bloodshot, furious, and shameless, all at once. I laughed, not out of humor but because I couldn't stomach the script anymore. Sacrificed? You mean when you burned through my college fund at Atlantic City? Or that time Mom told me to understand the adults when I asked why there was no tuition money left? Yet we still managed that family vacation in Florida? Nick cleared his throat. Mom flushed. The table fell silent. I stood, grabbed my coat. I'm not selling my car, I'm not wiring money, I'm not putting anything on the line for this family again. If you walk out that door, Dad hissed, don't expect to come back. I turned, standing tall in the thick, suffocating air. Good, because from now on I won't. As the door shut behind me, night had fully fallen. I didn't cry. What I felt, maybe for the first time in years, wasn't guilt for not being the good daughter. It was relief. A quiet, terrifying kind of lightness. I drove through the night, my chest still aching in waves from what had just unfolded at Thanksgiving dinner. But instead of heading straight home, I turned west. Down the winding road of Maple Court, leading to an old 2-story wooden house at the very end. The porch light was still on. The front roof remained half repaired after the summer storm, and the lawn had once again been lazily mowed. My family lived there, in the house they still believed was some miracle gift from a generous, anonymous landlord. Only I knew the name on the deed wasn't Brady Management LLC like they thought. It was Harper Ellen Harris. Me. The same woman they laughed at hours ago for living in a shoebox with leaky plumbing. I turned off the engine and sat in the darkness for a while, watching as the kitchen lights glowed from inside. It had been 3 years since I used my entire inheritance from my grandmother. Nearly $190,000 to cover most of the purchase price of that house. I still remembered the day I signed the paperwork, hands shaking so badly the notary handed me a bottle of water. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I gave my parents and younger brother a stable roof over their heads, they'd finally see me differently. Not as the quiet shadow always seated on the outskirts of the family table. I was wrong. I never set conditions, never asked them to pay a dime. I just sent them annual tax notices under the company name. Nicely printed, like a proper property management firm. They never questioned it. They simply assumed they deserved to be taken care of. No strings attached. When I chose to live downtown, in a small studio apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building on Lafayette Street, they laughed out loud. On the rare occasion they visited, rare as a meteor shower, my mother would whisper to the neighbors or building staff that I was still not settled, and that Harper is the kind of woman who doesn't even need a living room. Once I overheard my brother Mason tell his girlfriend, "My sister lives like some elderly hermit in the middle of New York." The irony? I quietly paid $680 a month in property tax for the very house he was living in. I remembered last winter like it was yesterday. They called me at midnight, said the roof was leaking badly. Dad had a cough that wouldn't go away, and Mom was worried about mold. No one asked where I'd get the money. I sent a roofing company first thing in the morning. The invoice was $6,400, pulled straight from the savings account I had set aside for my first vacation in 6 years. Last month, Mason texted me asking to borrow $300 for gas and some toys for his little girl. I wired it without hesitation. Later, I saw his Instagram story at a Lakers-Knicks game, courtside, VIP seats. I'm no saint, but I'm not stupid either. After leaving Thanksgiving dinner, I didn't go home. I drove to Sarah Green's office, my old college friend, now a real estate attorney with her own firm. She was the one who helped me form the LLC, transfer full ownership of the house under the company name, and keep my identity off every public record. Harper, Sarah looked up from her files, surprised to see me at the glass door just before 10 p.m. I have a question, I said plainly. If a landlord hasn't received rent for 3 years, but has covered all expenses, do they have the right to evict the tenants? She studied me for a moment, then waved me inside. Are you ready to tell them? I nodded. It felt like arming a bomb. Harper, if you're truly ready to end this game, we can start the process. But once we do, there's no undoing it. I pulled a bundle of papers from my bag. Roofing invoices, plumber receipts, last year's property assessment report. I don't want to go back anymore. I want them to know exactly who their generous landlord really is. Sarah's face grew more serious. Then welcome to the real fight. And trust me, sometimes, family makes the worst tenants. I didn't say anything else, just nodded. After years of silent sacrifice, they were about to learn a truth they never saw coming. That house was never a blessing. It was a test. And they failed, miserably. 3 days after Thanksgiving dinner, I was working from my favorite little cafe on Spring Street. The kind of cozy spot with soft lighting and the smell of cinnamon waffles that made me feel like I belonged, even when the world outside didn't. It was where I came to focus, away from the sound of leaky pipes in my studio apartment. I had just hit send on my year-end campaign report when the door chime jingled. I looked up from my screen and froze. My mother and brother, Mason, were walking toward me, faces full of exaggerated drama, like they'd rehearsed this scene on the way over. Before I could react, they were already seated. Mom dropped her oversized purse on the table with a thud, her eyes scanning the room before locking on my latte, as if silently judging its luxury. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice so low and somber I half expected her to announce someone had died. I shut my laptop. If this is about Dad's debt, I've already made myself clear. We're not trying to pressure you. Mason jumped in. We just hoped you could look at this from a family perspective. It's not just a personal issue anymore. I tilted my head. What do you mean? Mom's sister, Aunt Karen, said if we don't pay up soon, those loan guys might escalate. They've started calling the house. Said they'll show up if we don't handle it fast. Mom gently patted my hand, like she was auditioning for a primetime soap opera. Sweetheart, don't let something this small tear the whole family apart. If we have to, I'll pay you back. Every penny, just... For now, maybe you could... Sell the car, Mason said bluntly. That SUV of yours has to be worth at least 20 grand. Sell it, and take the train like everyone else. I stared at the two people across from me. My blood. The ones who used to say they loved me. Because you're our daughter. No one asked if I was still paying off student loans. No one cared that I've lived in a cramped studio for over a decade despite working full-time. No one remembered I've always been the one bringing the most gifts during the holidays. Paying the water bill when they accidentally forgot. Or wiring Mason money for his car inspection, only to see him post stories from a Utah getaway a week later. No, I said. Simply. Mom blinked. What? I'm not selling my car. And I'm not paying a single dollar more. Mason chuckled like I had just told a joke. You serious right now? I stood, grabbing my bag. I've been serious for years. I'm just done being the backup plan for everyone else's bad decisions. Need money? Sell Dad's boat. Sell that fishing gear collection he brags about being worth a Maui vacation. But stop looking at me. Mom called out as I turned to leave. If you walk out of here, don't expect me to treat you like my daughter anymore. I didn't look back. Great. Now you've got another reason to lie to the neighbors. That night, I locked my apartment door tight and called Sarah Green. You still sure about this? She asked, after I laid everything out. I've never been clearer, I replied. It's time they know who their kind landlord has really been, for the past 3 years. Sarah sighed. Then tomorrow I'll send over the full documentation. If we're moving forward with the recovery process, we'll have all the legal grounds in place. It's not just paperwork, I said. I'll need proof of non-payment, property damage, anything that makes it indisputable. I can help inspect the house, get photos, and write a formal report, she said. If they push back, they won't have a leg to stand on. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. Not quite relief. More like the steady clarity that comes when you stop waiting for someone to change. I had given them enough chances. This time, I wasn't going to talk. I was going to act. Monday morning, just as I stepped into the office, the receptionist waved me over with a hesitant look. "There are 2 women waiting in the lounge," she whispered. "They said they're your mother and your sister." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. This building was supposed to be my safe space. Free from nagging voices. From the pressure to help out. And from whispers. About the tiny apartment I lived in. I walked toward the lounge, and just as I expected, Mom sat upright in a pale blue blazer, while my sister Chloe had one leg crossed over the other, absent-mindedly twirling a wave of blonde hair around her finger. They both turned the moment they heard my heels on the wooden floor. "We need to talk," Mom began, her voice low but firm. "This is my workplace," I said, "not a family conference room." "Well, you won't answer your phone," Chloe shrugged. "We had no choice but to come here." "We?" I laughed. "Or is this just another installment of the tragic family show you kicked off over the weekend?" Mom stood up and stepped closer. "Your father's situation? It's serious, Harper. They showed up at the house. The neighbors are starting to talk." "Oh. So now you're concerned?" I tilted my head. "Or is it just about saving face?" Her expression faltered, but she tried to sound gentle. "Sweetheart, no matter what, we're still family. Families get through hard times together." "Family?" I scoffed. "Was it family when I worked 3 jobs to pay off my tuition because Dad gambled away my college fund? When I pulled $2,300, 0 cents out of my savings to fix a burst pipe, and didn't even get a thank you? Or when Chloe borrowed Grandma's necklace for prom and sold it on eBay to buy a flight to Palm Springs? Who kept quiet about that?" Chloe flushed red. "You can't keep dragging up the past." "Past?" I stepped closer, my tone no longer polite. "Those past debts still show up on my bank statements. So why are you here now? To pressure me? To guilt me into selling my car? Or is there a new sob story waiting?" "We're being threatened, Harper," Mom said, no longer pretending to be sweet. "Your father slipped up, and now we're all paying the price. You can't just stand by." I took a deep breath. "Enough." "All right," I said, pulling out my phone. "If you really need help, then you deserve to know the truth." I opened the folder labeled Brady Holdings and handed it to my mom. Screenshots of the deed, tax statements, and repair invoices, all under my name through a registered LLC. "The house you've been living in? It's not owned by some kind mystery landlord. It's mine. I bought it with every cent of the inheritance Grandma left me." She snatched the phone, eyes scanning the documents. "This is fake. It has to be fake. The originals are at the law office," I said calmly. "Sarah Green. You remember her? My college friend. She invited you to her wedding last year. She handled the purchase and helped keep my name off the records." Chloe shot up, eyes wide. "You mean, you've been lying to us for 3 years?" "No." I stayed quiet. "I let you live rent-free, comfortably, while I cut expenses, fixed the roof, replaced pipes, upgraded the heating system." Mom tossed the phone back like it was contaminated. "Why would you do this? To humiliate us? To play power games?" "No," I said softly. "I did it because I stupidly thought that if I gave you stability, you'd finally see me as part of the family." No one spoke for a few seconds. Just the hum of the printer and the scrape of a chair in the distance. Chloe exhaled sharply. So what now? You gonna kick us out? I didn't answer right away. I thought about all those nights I sat with a calculator, choosing between groceries and utility bills, while they posted party photos and bought new furniture. That depends, I said. If you want to have an adult conversation, I'm open. But if you're here to blame, manipulate, or make demands, then you'd better expect a letter from my lawyer. I turned and walked back toward my desk, leaving them standing silent in the middle of the office. Because now they knew. That house was never theirs. Not really. Saturday night, the air in New Jersey turned sharply cold. I drove alone to the house at the end of Willow Creek, where, for the past 3 years, my parents and Chloe had comfortably called home, never once asking about a single bill or whose name was actually on the deed. They were spending the weekend at Aunt Carol's, according to a vaguely threatening voicemail my mom left after our confrontation at my office. I figured they were using the time to strategize a comeback. But tonight, I had my own plan, and I came prepared, with a flashlight, a camera, and the property inspection checklist Sarah had sent from her law firm. As I turned the key, the one I'd always kept but never used, it felt like I was walking into the scene of an abandoned crime. The door creaked open and a rush of cigarette smoke and dampness hit me square in the face. I coughed, clicked on the flashlight, and stepped slowly into the living room. The once beige carpet was now a grimy brown, speckled with burn marks, remnants of cigarettes casually flicked and forgotten. On the wall near the window were 2 holes, one round, one rectangular, like someone had punched the drywall and left it that way for months. The mahogany coffee table, the only antique I had kept from Grandma's house, was covered in deep scratches and water rings from hot mugs with no coasters. I lifted my camera. Each shutter click echoed like a sentence passed. In the kitchen, the fridge was leaking, its handle hanging by one screw. Cabinet doors sagged on broken hinges, held up with strips of red duct tape. I opened the microwave. It was coated in a yellowish grease, with a burnt popcorn smell that made me gag. I climbed the stairs, the floorboards groaned under my weight, and I could feel a few spots sink noticeably. In the bathroom, I nearly slipped on pooled water around the base of the toilet. Clearly, a long-standing leak. Thick black mold snaked up the shower wall like vines. A testament to months, maybe years of neglect. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and exhaled. Something inside me cracked. Then I walked into my old bedroom, now Chloe's makeup room. The door opened to a scene that stopped me cold. At least 10 empty wine bottles littered the tile floor. The vanity was packed with high-end cosmetics, and the walls were plastered with pop star posters and sticker-covered selfies. The small wooden chest I used to store letters and childhood photos was missing its drawers. In the corner, I spotted a familiar red velvet box, the one that once held Grandma's jewelry, carefully kept in my locked apartment drawer. I knelt and opened it with trembling hands. Empty. No necklace. No ring, no earrings engraved with her initials. A wave of cold ran through me. I remembered exactly where I had stored that box. Inside a locked drawer. Once when I came home late from a business trip, the building safety team had broken into my unit after I failed to respond to a fire alarm drill. Maybe that was when they took it. I sat there, stunned. This so-called family hadn't just broken trust. They had stolen something sacred. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. A photo appeared. A pawn shop counter in the next town over, with a sign in the back reading, "Vintage jewelry. We pay more for proven family heirlooms." In the display case, Grandma's platinum teardrop necklace. I sat in the middle of what used to be the safest space of my childhood, feeling as empty as the jewelry box now resting in my lap. They hadn't just wrecked a house. They destroyed memories. I stood up and photographed every corner of the house. The pictures, the notes, the empty box. Everything would be gathered as evidence. Tomorrow, I'd send the full file to Sarah. No more helping out. No more, because we're family. Only what's real. Only what's mine. The next afternoon, I was sitting in Sarah's law office, finalizing the lawsuit paperwork when my phone rang. The screen flashed. Call from Valentina, neighbor. I answered, unsure why she was calling. Harper, her voice was urgent and uncertain. Can you come by for a bit? There's something I think you need to see. 10 minutes later, I was seated in her warm, tidy kitchen. The cozy, cream-colored house just across the street from the one I bought. Valentina, a widow in her 60s, lived alone and had always been polite, even though my family had never treated her kindly. She placed a small black USB drive on the table in front of me. I installed security cameras around my house 5 years ago, she said. Partly because there were a few break-ins around the neighborhood, but mostly because I started seeing things next door that didn't feel right. I looked up at her. I didn't know you were the owner back then. But when you mentioned it the other day in your office, I started going back through the footage. And Harper, I saved nearly everything. She opened her laptop. Frame by frame, the clips played out. My father, Jeff, slamming his hand into the garage door when I refused to co-sign a loan. Chloe, sneaking a velvet jewelry box into her car. The very day of that so-called building safety check last year. My mother pointing at me in the front yard, shouting because I didn't come home for family dinner. Scene after scene. Yelling, intrusion, humiliation. The footage was silent, but I didn't need sound. Each frame punched the air from my chest. I don't know whether to cry or say thank you, I whispered, eyes still locked on the screen. Valentina reached across the table and held my hand. I didn't interfere before because I thought it was family business. But now I understand. This is emotional abuse. And you don't deserve it. I clutched the USB tightly. I knew this wasn't just a collection of files. This was the key to stripping away the facade they had worked so hard to maintain. 2 days later, I shot up from my chair when an email from Sarah popped up. Harper's family has filed a countersuit, alleging elder abuse, asset manipulation, and financial fraud. My throat went dry. They really did it. They had tossed gratitude aside and twisted reality into a legal weapon. We're going to fight this, Sarah said firmly when I arrived at her office later that afternoon. And I'll make sure they regret underestimating you. We began assembling everything. Payment receipts, bank statements showing I paid the property taxes, repair bills, utility fees. I handed over every screenshot and annotated file plus the videos from Valentina. Sarah queued up one clip for review, a moment caught on camera of my father yelling. She thinks she owns something? That house is mine no matter what name's on the deed. I raised her, she owes us everything. That sentence, cruel, blunt, but undeniable. I've submitted an emergency motion, Sarah said. We'll countersue and present claims of harassment, property damage, and illegal occupancy, and if necessary, we'll press criminal charges for the theft of your grandmother's jewelry. I don't know how long I sat there afterward. My head swirled with 1,000 emotions. Anger, fear, betrayal. But then, something else settled in. Clarity. I wasn't the same Harper they used to walk all over. I looked Sarah in the eye. Let's do it. No more backing down. Worst case, I lose a house. But they lose the mask. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. You'll pay for betraying your family, no one will stand with you. I forwarded it to Sarah and turned off my phone. Tomorrow I'd walk into court. Not as the abandoned daughter, but as the rightful owner. And this time, I had evidence. Courtroom 3 at the Bergen County Courthouse was packed that day. I sat silently beside Sarah, dressed in a plain gray suit, gripping my case folder like it was the only thing holding me upright. Across from me, my mother wore a cream sweater, eyes red, clutching an old Bible like a prop. Chloe looked like she was headed to a wedding, not a courtroom. Floral dress, curled hair, smug posture. My father, Jeff, wore a suit 2 sizes too big, but his glare was just as bitter as every time I dared to defy him. Presiding over the hearing was Judge Harris, a woman in her 60s. Known for her no-nonsense courtroom. No theatrics, no emotional manipulation. The plaintiff's lawyer. My family's representative. Opened with a painfully dramatic monologue about a daughter poisoned by resentment and 2 elderly parents being financially abused. They claimed I had orchestrated a scheme to steal the house and heartlessly evict my family. I said nothing. I just looked at Sarah. When Judge Harris nodded for our side to respond, Sarah stood. "Your Honor," she began, clear and steady. "We will present a structured rebuttal, supported by verified financial documentation and surveillance video provided by a neutral third-party neighbor, with no familial connection to either side." She opened the file. "These are the expenditures made by my client, Harper Ellen Harris, over the past 3 years. Property taxes, $19,600, 0 cents. Roof replacement, $4,400, 0 cents. Heating system upgrade, $7,800, 0 cents. Average monthly utility costs, $430, 0 cents. Total out-of-pocket expenses, $47,380, 0 cents. The courtroom stirred. Sarah continued. "During this entire period, the defendants paid no rent, signed no lease, made no requests for improvements, and engaged in intentional damage to the property." She handed the USB to the court clerk. The screen lit up. First, footage of my father pounding the garage door, shouting, subtitled "Thanks to Valentina's help." Next, Chloe sneaking out the back door with Grandma's jewelry box. Then, my mother yelling in the front yard as I walked away. Judge Harris cut the video at 30 seconds. "The evidence is clear. Do the defendants have any response?" My mother stood, trembling. We didn't know. Harper never told us she owned the house." "Not saying doesn't make it untrue," Judge Harris replied dryly. My father growled, unable to contain himself. "I raised that girl, and now she throws us out like garbage?" Sarah didn't flinch. "You're the one who took out loans that brought collectors to your doorstep. You gambled away her college fund, forcing her to work 3 jobs. And you're the one who declared that house is mine, no matter whose name is on it, in the 3rd surveillance video." Chloe shot up. "She's always been jealous of me, always trying to prove she's better. That video was edited." "Miss Chloe Harris?" The judge's tone turned sharp. "The footage was legally obtained and unaltered, and taking property that doesn't belong to you is theft. If you'd like to deny it further, we can escalate this to a criminal case." Chloe slumped back down, pale and shaking. Judge Harris rested her hand on the file stack. "This court does not rule on emotion. We rule on evidence. And the evidence shows that Miss Harper Harris bore the full financial burden while the defendants unlawfully occupied, damaged, and defamed the rightful property owner." Silence hung heavy in the room. "My ruling," she continued, "is that the defendants have 30 days to vacate the property or face legal action as unlawful tenants. Should they wish to remain, rent will be calculated at full market value, plus penalties for damages incurred." My mother burst into tears. My father cursed under his breath. Chloe sat frozen. As for me, I stayed still. Judge Harris looked at me. "Miss Harris, if any party continues to harass you, notify the court immediately. This is a legal matter, not a family dispute." I nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." Outside the courtroom, my mother grabbed my arm. "Are you happy now? You won. Is this what you wanted?" I gently pulled her hand away. "No, Mum. But at least this time, I wasn't lied to." On the 30th afternoon, the final day of the court-ordered deadline, I stood at the far end of Willow Creek, watching a scene I once hoped I'd never have to witness. A rental truck blocked the driveway. 3 movers loading heaps of worn, mismatched belongings into the back. On the lawn sat a ripped armchair, its stuffing peeking through, and next to it, Chloe's denim duffel bag. The one she once bragged about buying on her trip to Cancun. My mother stood in the doorway, tears streaming, still trying to maintain the air of someone wronged by the universe. My father barked orders at the movers, his leather shoes now mud-stained from pacing across the wet grass. I didn't step onto the property, I waited at a distance. At exactly 4:20 p.m. the locksmith I hired arrived. Block 10 dark blue jacket, company logo stitched above the chest. He gave me a quick glance. I nodded. He approached the front door. My mother lunged to block him, her voice cracking. "You're changing the locks the moment we walk out? Really, Harper, it's come to this?" I stepped forward, calm enough to scare myself. "This isn't your home, Mom. It's the property I bought, maintained, and am now forced to protect after years of having my trust abused." "I raised you!" she screamed. "You owe me everything!" I met her eyes. "You raised me on the condition that I never disappoint you. And the second I stopped obeying, you called me ungrateful. But you're the one who taught me any love that comes with control isn't real love." My father stormed forward, face flushed. "You're destroying this family over a house?" I let out a dry laugh. Families don't fall apart over property. They fall apart when the people in them demand, trample, and blame, without ever owning up to what they've done. Chloe wheeled her suitcase past me, fury in her eyes. "You'll regret this. One day you'll be so alone, you'll beg us to forgive you." I looked at my sister, the same one who stole Grandma's jewelry and treated it like a soulless trinket. "I've been alone before, Chloe. But I'd rather be alone and free than surrounded by people who see me as nothing but a talking wallet." The locksmith looked at me for the go-ahead. I nodded. The metal click of the old lock coming off echoed like a final sentence. The 3 of them stood there, stunned, angry, and for the first time, powerless. I didn't look back as I stepped through the gate. A week later I received 3 unread messages. One from Mom, one from Dad, and one from an unknown number I was sure was Chloe using a different SIM. The contents were familiar. Tears, guilt, blame, and the final sweet threat that no one will ever love you again. I hit delete all without hesitation. I didn't move back into the house. Even after it was deep cleaned, repainted, recarpeted and deodorized, I had no interest in living inside a space that had witnessed years of being used as an emotional ATM. Instead, I listed the property with a licensed rental agency. Within a week, a young couple from Hoboken signed a long-term lease with full maintenance, accountability, and timely payment guarantees. They thanked me for giving them a fresh start in a quiet neighborhood. As for me, I returned to my little studio on Lafayette Street. 400 square feet. White walls, a tiny kitchen built for one. The window overlooked a neighbor's rooftop. But every tile underfoot, every coat hook by the door. I picked it. I painted it. I installed it. At night, I boiled tea on the stove and played jazz from my beat-up Bluetooth speaker. No one called asking me to cover their refrigerator repair. No one knocked to borrow just a couple hundred, "We'll pay you back next week." No one reminded me I wasn't really grown up because I wasn't married yet. I sat in my wooden chair by the window, watched the golden lamplight stretch across the wall, and realized I never needed a house to prove anything. I only needed peace. And for the first time in my life, I had it. No hands grabbing, no voices commanding, no guilt-tripping masks demanding repayment in the name of love. Just me. No debt, no emotional strings, no conditions. And that peace, that silence, was the most valuable thing I'd ever owned. One quiet Saturday morning, sunlight spilled through the window of my little Lafayette Street apartment. As I brewed coffee, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I'd previously blocked and unblocked. This time, it showed a name. Chloe. Sister. Hope you're enjoying yourself after throwing your whole family onto the street. Mom still cries every night. But I guess that doesn't bother you anymore. Looks like money and control are what you always wanted. I read it without feeling anger, nausea, or even resentment. Just silence. Then I pressed and held, tapped, delete conversation, and watched the message vanish without leaving a ripple in me. Not long after came an email from my mother. Subject line: "Can't believe you did this to us." 3 lengthy paragraphs followed, laced with guilt, comparisons, and the familiar refrain, "After all we sacrificed for you." I didn't finish reading it. I knew what would come next. Their pain, their broken hearts, the closing line warning that I'd one day live alone and full of regret. I closed the email, sat down slowly on the sofa by the window. My coffee was still hot. Sunlight glowed across the oak table I'd varnished with my own hands, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not guilt, but clarity. I saw it clearly now. I hadn't broken the family. I had escaped the prison, built on guilt and promises of love. I used to think forgiveness meant silent endurance, that being the bigger person was the only way to stay connected. But love that requires you to lose yourself isn't love at all. For 33 years, I had chosen them. I chose to pay tuition instead of traveling. I chose to repair the roof instead of buying a new laptop. I chose to skip friends' graduations because I was working to pay their property taxes. This time, I chose me. And oddly, no thunder struck. There was only peace. The kind I used to confuse with emptiness, but now recognized as freedom. The next weekend, I welcomed my new tenants, Marcus and Hannah, with their 2-year-old daughter Ellie. They entered what had once been my battlefield, carrying a pothos plant and a chubby little corgi. Marcus beamed as he looked over the lease. "You're the best landlord we've ever met. Everything's clear, thoughtful, and this house actually feels cared for." I smiled. I once gave this house everything I had. I just hope now it finally gets the love it deserves. Once they finished moving in, I stood at the edge of the yard and looked in. Warm lights glowed through the windows, and laughter from the kitchen echoed down the driveway. Laughter more real and joyful than any Thanksgiving I'd endured there. No more blame. No more family used as a shield for manipulation. The house had been cleansed, and so had I. That evening, back in my apartment, I wrote in my journal. An old habit I'd reclaimed now that I was no longer buried under endless responsibility. I don't need forgiveness, I don't need to be understood, I just need to know that I lived truthfully, loved fully, gave what I could, and now it's time to receive, not from anyone else, but from myself. I looked around. The thrifted painting from a Brooklyn market, the self-assembled bookshelf, the little desk under the window where I once wrote my first resume. The space wasn't grand, but every inch reflected who I truly was. Unfiltered, unbent by expectation. That was something I'd never had before. Another message buzzed. "Mom called 10 times. Not answering is cruel, Harper." From an unsaved number. I didn't have to guess who it was. I quietly switched on Do Not Disturb. Then, turned the phone face down. I lit a candle, dimmed the lights, sat in stillness. No explanation needed. No defense necessary. Just breath. Karma, I realized, wasn't some mystical revenge. Karma was simply refusing to let people keep hurting you legally. Karma was closing the door, not in bitterness, but in dignity. And once that door is locked, No one gets to bring the darkness back in. Harper's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, the only way to protect your peace is by walking away from the people who exploit your loyalty in the name of family. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's clarity after years of emotional debt. In real life, setting boundaries doesn't destroy family. It reveals who never respected it to begin with. True freedom begins the moment you stop asking for permission to feel safe. What would you have done in Harper's place? Would you have chosen peace, too? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt, thought-provoking stories about family and life. If someone had told me that my life would completely change because of one overheard conversation, I probably would have laughed in their face. But I wasn't laughing when it actually happened. A loveless marriage, a life-changing deal signed out of desperation, and a proposal from a man I had never met, just because I was Marshall's daughter. I'm Lily Marshall, 23 years old, a recent college graduate in Boston, standing at a crossroads in life. My life had been fairly quiet. My father ran a family business that specialized in high-end glass doors in New Hampshire, and my mother had retired early to tend her garden and read books. I never thought I'd join the family business. In fact, I had always pictured myself opening a small bookstore in Vermont, serving coffee and selling classic novels. But it all fell apart on a June afternoon. That day, I accidentally overheard my dad on the phone, thinking I wasn't home. His voice was low, tense, at times almost trembling, something I had never seen from the calm, steady man I'd always known. "No, Mr. Grayson, I'm not selling. Marshall Glass is my life's work. Don't push me." I stood frozen in the doorway of his study, my heart pounding. Grayson. I'd heard that name before. A corporate raider from New York, infamous for taking over family businesses and selling off their assets. Shares of Marshall Glass had been scattered over years of fundraising, and I guessed he was using that to seize control. That night, I said nothing. Dad acted normal. He smiled at Mom when she brought out a slightly burned beef stew, then asked me about school. But his gaze drifted for a few seconds when he looked into his wine glass. I knew something was very wrong. The next day, I looked up everything I could about Grayson and Associates online, and somehow, I found myself on a train to New York, walking into the glass tower that housed the Grayson headquarters, blurting out something insane to the receptionist. "I want to speak to Mr. Charles Grayson. I'm Lily Marshall, Marshall's daughter." She looked at me like I'd just claimed I was from Mars. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but please, just 5 minutes, that's all I ask." After a few calls, the unthinkable happened. She nodded and pointed to the elevator. 47th floor, he's waiting for you." I clutched my purse strap and stepped into the mirror-lined elevator, where I could see my own fear reflected back at me. When the doors opened, I saw a man around 60 standing by the window, back turned to me, holding a glass of wine. "Miss Marshall," he said without turning. "I didn't think you'd come, but I like people who do what others won't." He turned around and looked me over with icy eyes. Charles Grayson. Silver hair, gray suit. A stare that could cut through steel. "I came to beg you. Please, don't take my father's company, it means everything to him." He sat down in a leather chair, crossed his legs, and set his wineglass aside. "Beg me? I'm not one to be moved by tears, young lady." "I'm not crying," I said, clenching my fists. "I just want to know if there's another way." He was silent for a few seconds, then smiled. A smile that made my spine shiver. "Actually, there is." He opened a drawer and placed a photo on the table. A young man with a cocky grin and eyes full of apathy. "This is my son, Ethan. Lazy, impulsive, doesn't care about anything except games and girls. I want him to change." I frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "Marry him," he said simply. "I'll drop the takeover. You marry him, help him grow up. In return, your father keeps the company." I stood up. "Are you insane?" "Possibly," he chuckled. "But I'm not joking. I left, my heart thundering. I had hoped to find a solution, not walk into a twisted fairy tale trap. But I couldn't sleep that night. I thought of my dad, of the years he spent building Marshall glass from a tiny workshop into one of the most respected glass contractors in the Northeast. I thought of the way he used to hold me and say, "You don't have to carry anything, Lily. Just live the life you want." But if I walked away now, he'd lose everything. So I went back. 47th floor, again. "I'll do it," I said, voice shaking slightly. "I'll marry your son." Grayson clapped his hands like he'd just won a poker hand. "Good, very good. I'll have someone take you to meet Ethan shortly. Try to make a good impression." I swallowed the lump in my throat, the side door opened, and then I saw Ethan Grayson. The man who was about to become my husband for one reason only: to save my father's legacy. I remember exactly how it felt walking out of that room after signing the marriage license with Ethan Grayson. Everything was legal, binding, irreversible. I had become the wife of a man I'd met less than a month ago. And ironically, I didn't marry him for love. I did it because I couldn't bear to see my father on his knees before someone like Charles Grayson. The wedding was quiet, private, so understated that even my college friends thought it was a joke. No fresh flowers, no live music, not even genuine smiles. Just one haunting question echoing in my mind throughout the ceremony. Lily Marshall. Now Lily Grayson. What are you doing with your life? After a whirlwind honeymoon at a luxury resort in Maine, where Ethan and I spent more time staring at our phones than at each other, we moved into a house his father bought for us in the suburbs of Stamford, Connecticut. The house was spacious and beautiful, like something out of an interior design magazine, but it had no warmth. It felt more like a showroom than a home. We slept under the same roof, but lived in different worlds. Ethan woke up late every morning, coffee cold by the time he finished watching racing live streams or reading crypto news. I made breakfast, set it on the table, and sat across from empty air. He'd eat whenever he felt like it. Sometimes the food sat untouched until noon. I wasn't angry, I accepted it. Because I knew this marriage never started with love. Ethan was agreeable in the way that detachment is easy. He didn't hit me, didn't insult me, didn't do anything awful. But that apathy was suffocating. We lived like roommates, occasionally nodding at each other, sometimes exchanging small talk. But between us was a distance neither of us wanted to cross. I tried to break the pattern. I asked him to go grocery shopping with me on the weekends, suggested movie nights, cooked his favorite meals. He smiled and said thank you, then declined, at first politely. Then, eventually, with silence. My father, now relieved the company was safe, called me every week. I told him everything was fine. A lie, but one that kept him from worrying more. The one and only time I saw a hint of drive in Ethan was when I suggested he try working at Grayson & Associates. I said, "Even just a few days a week would be fine. I think you need something to aim for." He looked up, his eyes hazy. "Are you trying to change me?" "No, I just want you to try for yourself." To my surprise, he agreed. I went with him to the office for the first time, standing on the sidelines as his father introduced him to the department heads. I saw a brief flicker of pride in Mr. Grayson's eyes, and for the first time since the wedding, I thought, maybe I didn't make a complete mistake. But that hope didn't last long. Ethan started going to the office regularly for 3 weeks. Then he said he was too busy, then only showed up twice a week, then stopped going altogether. When I asked why, he sighed. "Dad just wants a trophy to show off to his golf buddies. I'm not interested in being anyone's puppet." I didn't know how to respond. He wasn't entirely wrong, but I also couldn't accept him giving up so easily. Then there was my mother-in-law, Mrs. Violet Grayson. A sharp, elegant woman despite being nearly 60, with eyes that made me feel like I was just too plain to belong in this world. She never said anything outright, but every time I appeared, she'd comment, "Oh, You're wearing that dress. That color's a bit bold for your complexion, isn't it? But you're young, so go ahead and try. Lily, I heard you studied French literature. Fascinating, though I always thought that field isn't the most financially practical. I smiled, tried to smile, swallowed those tiny barbed comments that cut deep into my sense of self-worth. I used to think, maybe if we had a child, things would change. Maybe affection would grow out of responsibility. Maybe Ethan would mature through fatherhood. But when I casually brought up the idea one evening, Ethan dismissed it immediately. Don't talk about kids, we're not ready, I'm not ready. I wanted to ask, when will you actually be part of this life? But I didn't. I just cleared the table and went upstairs early. The only thing keeping me anchored then was the charity foundation I had started with private funding, not from the Graysons. I called it New Light Foundation because I needed something to prove I was still alive, still had worth. As for Ethan, he kept living like tomorrow didn't exist. Loud friends, long nights, hard liquor, and I was slowly becoming a shadow in my own home. And then one day I got a text from my father. We need to talk, urgent. I didn't know what I was about to face, but I had a gut feeling it would change everything. That message led to a simple dinner at his old apartment in Concord. He didn't bring up the company or ask about Ethan. Instead, he just placed his hand gently over mine. You look so tired, Lily. If you ever need anything, I'm always here. I nearly burst into tears. How long had it been since someone asked if I was okay? I returned to Stamford that evening in a light rain, my mind blank. One question kept repeating. What kind of life am I even living? Not long after that, I realized I was late. For the first time in nearly a year of marriage, I felt excited, not scared, hopeful. Maybe a child could fill the gap between Ethan and me. Maybe a new life would change everything. I made an appointment and went to the doctor alone. After some tests, the doctor turned to me with a professionally serious expression. The good news is, you're in perfect health, but your husband's semen analysis doesn't look good. He's infertile. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Excuse me? We ran multiple tests to confirm. There's no natural ability to conceive, from his side. I walked out of the clinic like someone who'd just been slapped across the face. All sound became distorted, and each of my footsteps echoed like a hollow drumbeat inside my skull. That evening, I spoke to Ethan while he sat on the couch, beer can in hand, eyes glued to his phone. Ethan, I just got back from the clinic. Yeah, another checkup? The doctor said, you can't have children. He said nothing for a few seconds. Then, without even looking at me, he shrugged. So what? It's not like we were planning to have any. Don't you think? That's important? It isn't to you. To me, the fewer attachments, the better. Don't get too emotional over something that never existed. I was stunned, not because of the medical reality, but because of the coldness in his voice. That night, I lay with my back turned to Ethan, blanket pulled up to my chin, but the chill seeped in anyway. I pictured a child with brown eyes like my father's, running through a sunlit garden. The image popped like a soap bubble. The next morning, I got up early, made breakfast, brewed coffee. Ethan didn't eat, of course. But I needed to do something familiar to keep from feeling completely adrift. As I washed the dishes, I looked at my hands. Dry, thin, wrinkled beyond what 23 should look like. I whispered like a confession. I'm fading away. During dinner with my father one evening, I said, I want to work. I can't just stay home being someone's wife, waiting to age. My father nodded, his expression serious. Then do it, I support you. You've always had the right to live for yourself. I returned and told Ethan. His reaction made it seem like I had just announced I was about to destroy the world. Work? What more do you need? House, car, money? That charity you run keeps you busy enough. I don't want to just live off your family's money. I need something that's mine, Ethan. He laughed, a dry, brittle sound like burning paper. "You're my wife, Lily. In our circle, wives do charity, go to galas, not get jobs like some community college grad." I looked him straight in the eye, said nothing, because if I had spoken, I would have screamed. The next day, I set up an office for the New Light Foundation, financially independent, not tied to the Graysons by a single cent. I started working with hospitals, funding treatment for children with cancer, organizing fundraising events at schools and in local communities. I rediscovered what it felt like to live, something my marriage to Ethan had never given me. But what about him? He still lived in his own world. Parties with friends, games and bars. And me. I was the one cleaning up after lives I didn't belong to. One time, after returning from the hospital where I had visited pediatric patients, still smelling faintly of disinfectant, I found Ethan stretched out on the sofa, holding a bottle of whiskey, staring blankly at the ceiling. "I used to want to be a musician," he said, voice hoarse. I sat beside him gently. "Then why don't you try again?" He shook his head, eyes red. "Because no one believed in me. Not even me." I placed my hand on his. In that moment, I saw something real in him, but it was faint like smoke. And I knew, if I kept going like this, I'd burn out right alongside him. Day by day, Ethan drifted further from me. I went to bed alone, woke up alone, and one day, I looked in the mirror and asked myself, is this what I traded my future for? I didn't know the answer, but I knew I was changing. And the fragile balance of our world was about to collapse. I named my foundation New Light Foundation, not because it sounded impressive, but because I needed something to pull me out of the darkness surrounding my life. Ever since that morning when Ethan scoffed at the idea of me working, I knew one thing for sure. If I kept waiting for him to wake up, I would disappear. And I no longer wanted to be a shadow in my own life. New Light began in a small office I rented on the second floor of an old building in Bridgeport. No fancy signage, no grand opening. Just me, an old laptop, a few pediatric case files, and a stack of permits I filed myself. But for the first time in a year and a half of being Mrs. Grayson, my heart beat for something truly worth living for. I began connecting with hospitals in the area, especially the pediatric wing at St. Michael's. The children there with cancer, I didn't know what else to call them but tiny warriors. Some were just 3 years old, bald from treatment, but still grinning when handed a box of crayons. Others trembled, but still managed a soft, "Thank you, Miss Lily," when I held their hands. I came back to life. And Ethan? He spiraled even further the other way. Every night I came home, tired but with a quiet peace in my heart. I'd hear pounding music from the living room. Ethan would be hosting friends, names I couldn't keep track of, laughing loudly among liquor bottles and ashtrays. I walked past them like a ghost. No one asked where I'd been. No one said hello. One time, I pushed aside a pile of beer cans to place a stack of documents down. Ethan frowned. "Can you stop acting like everyone's mom in this house?" I looked straight into his eyes, unblinking. At least someone in this house should still remember it is a house. He scoffed and turned away. I didn't need to say anything more. Our marriage, if it was ever parallel, was now just 2 lines pulling farther and farther apart. By the 3rd month since launching, the foundation received its first donation from a Greek-American businessman, Mr. Demetrios, who had lost his niece to leukemia. He visited my office wearing a gray suit and spoke with a deep, warm voice. "I don't believe in many things, Miss Lily, but I believe in people who don't give up in the face of pain." That first donation of $120,000 allowed me to host 3 consecutive fundraisers, including an acoustic music event at the downtown park. That day, standing among rows of children and tearful mothers, I felt like I had come home to myself. No one called me Ethan's wife, no one knew who my father-in-law was. I was Lily, a real person, doing real work, making real effort. That night I came home late. Ethan was sitting in front of the TV, face vacant, like his soul had been drained. He didn't ask where I'd been. He only muttered, "They're about to kick me off the board. Dad only put me there for show. Now that he's dead, they treat me like garbage." I poured him a glass of water and placed it on the table. "If you went back to work, things could still change." He laughed, eyes fixed on the screen. "You think I haven't tried? That company's a glass cage. They locked me in it to show off a young Grayson, but never gave me a single ounce of real power." I didn't know what to say, because deep down, I knew Ethan might have once wanted to do something, but he didn't have the strength. And I no longer had the patience. One day, I received an invitation to a conference in Washington, D.C., about effective community foundation models. Excited, I printed it out and placed it on the kitchen counter. 3 days later, it was crumpled in the trash. I found Ethan and asked, "What did you do with my invitation?" He leaned against the doorframe, half-drunk gaze. "Oh, that thing? What are you gonna do there? Give a speech? Take pictures? You love the spotlight that much, huh?" I clenched my fists, voice low. I love the feeling of helping people. It makes me feel useful. Unlike living in this house, feeling like a stranger to my own husband. He smirked. "Then go, but don't expect me to be here waiting when you get back." That sentence didn't really hurt me. It just confirmed something I'd known for a long time. We were no longer a married couple. We were just two names, tied together by a piece of paper I now wanted to tear apart. By the 6th month, I transferred all legal documents for the foundation to my name. I also quietly opened a separate bank account, completely unrelated to any Grayson money. I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for, but my instincts told me a storm was coming. And this time, I wouldn't hide under the porch. The news of Mr. Charles Grayson, my father-in-law, passing, came on a September morning, while I was on my way to St. Michael's to sign transfer papers for a young patient. My phone kept buzzing in my purse, and when I finally answered, "His assistant." "Marin," choked out the words. "Mr. Grayson had a heart attack this morning. He didn't make it." I froze in the middle of the sterile white hallway, my vision blurred, not from grief but from shock. A part of me, though I never wanted to admit it, still believed he'd live for many more years. Someone like him, wealthy, sharp, always in control, couldn't possibly just leave like that. When I got home, Ethan was standing at the kitchen counter, pale as a sheet, an open bottle of liquor beside him, his hand shaking too much to pour a drink. I stepped closer, speaking gently. "I'm so sorry." He looked at me, eyes dazed like someone pulled from a dream that hadn't ended. Then he said, voice barely above a whisper, "It's all mine now, I'm the CEO." I nodded slightly, saying nothing. From that day on, Ethan put on a role he was never ready to play. Leading a multi-million-dollar corporation. He went to the office every morning, polished, punctual, even got a proper haircut. I wanted to believe that, at the very least, this time he'd change. But after only 1 month, everything began to crack. Ethan fired the senior advisor without informing the board. He relocated the entire accounting department to a satellite office in New Jersey because he hated traffic in Stamford. And worst of all, he approved a nearly $3 million real estate investment in a zone with no legal vetting. I heard about it from Mr. Thompson, a former associate of my father-in-law, at a charity gala hosted by the New Light Foundation. "Miss Lily," he said, shaking his head, voice low. "Ethan is not Charles. And the company isn't a toy." I felt a cold, heavy stone drop into my chest. While Ethan unraveled in the chaos of corporate life, my mother-in-law, Mrs. Violet Grayson, began to noticeably lose weight. I saw it when I visited her for her 59th birthday. She used to appear with neatly styled hair, Chanel No. 5 perfume, and perfectly trimmed heels. That day, she wore a faded silk robe, her hair was a mess and her skin looked pale. I knew something was wrong. After much persuasion, she agreed to see a doctor. The result left both of us speechless. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. I'm not going to the hospital, she said, eyes locked on mine. I've spent my whole life in someone else's house. I want to die in my own. I didn't argue, I just nodded. Then I got to work. I delegated more responsibilities at the foundation to my executive assistant. I hired 2 specialized nurses, installed a hospital bed, respiratory equipment, and a programmable heater. I coordinated every pill, every IV, every meal. At first, Mrs. Violet didn't say much. She had always been confident, composed, and reserved. But I saw her gaze shift. Softer. Less cold. One afternoon, as I was changing her bed sheets, she placed her hand on mine, dry, light, trembling, and whispered, "You're a good woman." I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. I turned away, quickly hiding my tearful eyes. Thank you for saying that. Every day I sat by her bedside, telling small stories about the children at the foundation, playing Chopin, reading the morning paper. She gradually opened up. She told me about her youth, how she gave up art school to marry Charles. About her dream of painting church murals in Italy. But I chose the path of family, she said with a sad smile, and everything stopped there. Meanwhile, Ethan spiraled further. One evening, as I was spoon-feeding porridge to Mrs. Violet, my phone rang. A former employee at Grayson called. "Miss Lily, sorry to bother you, but Ethan hasn't shown up at the office in 3 days, and the company bank account's been frozen due to a suspicious transaction." I stood still. The shock hit like lightning. That night, Ethan stumbled through the door, clothes wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, reeking of alcohol. I blocked the doorway to his mother's room and said each word clearly. "You're not going in there like this." He looked up, eyes mocking. "You running the house now? I'm taking care of your mother, the woman you haven't visited in over 3 weeks. He scoffed. "She never loved me, and you're just pretending to be noble to win over a dying woman." I clenched my fists but kept my voice steady. "Whether she loved you or not, she's still your mother. And me? I don't need to win anyone over." I shut the door. For the first time, without trembling. I knew Ethan had hit rock bottom. But I wasn't there to pull him back up anymore. I got the call at 4:13 in the morning. The hour when every piece of news has the power to destroy your entire world. "Is this Miss Lily Marshall?" "Yes, speaking." "We regret to inform you, the private plane carrying Mr. and Mrs. Marshall crashed during landing at a small airport in Vermont. There were no survivors." I stood frozen in the dark living room, the phone slipping from my hand onto the wooden floor, making a small sound that cut like a knife. My parents, the only people left who truly cared about me, were gone. No goodbye, no warning, not even one last hug. That flight, as far as I knew, was a second honeymoon my father gifted my mother for their 30th anniversary. I'd even sent a teasing text the night before. "Don't get too lovey-dovey and forget to call me." That message was never answered. The funeral took place 3 days later, cold, quiet, and empty. I stood alone among the pews. No family beside me. Ethan didn't come. I called, I texted, I left voicemails, no response. I watched my parents' caskets lower into the earth, gripping a handkerchief my mother once embroidered, feeling like I'd been torn in half and left drifting in a void. And then, when I returned home that afternoon after the funeral, Ethan's polished black shoes were already waiting on the doorstep. He was sitting cross-legged in my father's office, still scented faintly of oak and ink, like it was his domain. "Hey," he said, looking up, voice light. "I just made a few changes." I stepped in, voice raspy. "You didn't come to the funeral." "Yeah, busy." I had no words left. But Ethan wasn't done. He turned the computer screen toward me, showing a login page for the bank account and internal operations dashboard of Marshall Glass, my father's company. I've logged into the system, got all the passwords. I froze. My voice trembled. "What are you talking about?" "I'm the vice president, Lily. Don't forget, your father put me on the executive board with temporary authority while you focused on the foundation. Now that he's gone, everything falls to me. I stepped back. You're insane. He smirked. No. I've never been more clear. Your father's company is worth nearly $12 million. I'm not stupid enough to let that go. I saw it clearly in his eyes. No trace of the tired, weak husband I once knew. Standing before me now was someone cold, calculating, and dangerous. You have no right, I said through clenched teeth. I'm the heir. Ethan laughed. A dry metallic sound. Do you have a copy of the will? Any legal proof? You don't really think everything would just fall into your lap because you're daddy's little girl, do you? I stepped forward, yanked the screen from his hands. You're playing with fire. He stared at me. Then, calmly, he pulled a folder from his bag and tossed it onto the table. Oh, and one more thing. Here's the divorce paperwork. We've pretended long enough. I stood in silence. Divorce. Not because the love was gone, that had been obvious for a long time, but because he wanted the rest, the company, the assets, my freedom. You plan to walk away with the money, the title, and crush whatever I have left? He shrugged. Exactly. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. The pain of losing my parents was still raw. And now, the shame of being blatantly betrayed by my own husband. I walked out of the room without looking back. I knew I couldn't fall apart, not now. Everything Ethan had done, I would deal with it. But not with tears. With the law. With the truth. I didn't shed a tear when I signed the divorce papers Ethan threw onto the table. Not one. But my hand trembled so much it took me 2 tries to place the pen in the right spot. Not because I still loved him, but because, in that moment, I felt like I was burying everything I had hoped for, everything I had fought for, everything I had endured, for a marriage that never truly existed. The very next morning, I went to the office of Mr. Peter Langston, my father's longtime personal attorney, a silver-haired, composed man who had witnessed every major turning point in my family's life. He opened the door with genuine sorrow in his eyes, different from the formal grief I had seen at the funeral. Lily, your father was an extraordinary man. He loved you more than anything. I nodded gently, trying to stay composed. I need to know if he left anything for me. Ethan says he's running the company, that he was an authorized vice president. Peter paused, then slowly opened a drawer and took out a sealed folder. There were things your father didn't get to say, but he made sure everything was in place. I held my breath as he placed the will on the table. My name, Lily Amanda Marshall, was clearly printed on the first page. Peter opened the file, his voice steady and resolute. Charles Marshall, your father updated his will 3 weeks before his death. In it, he formally terminated Ethan Grayson from his role as vice president, and left all shares and full ownership of Marshall Glass to you, and you alone. I couldn't hold it in, tears welled up, not because of the inheritance, but because my father had foreseen something, and he didn't abandon me. Can I actually run the company? I asked, voice tight. Peter smiled and placed a hand on my shoulder. You built an entire charity from scratch. You have the mind, the strength, and most importantly, the heart. That's what a real CEO needs. I nodded. For the first time in weeks, I felt solid ground beneath my feet. And Ethan? I asked, eyes on the legal folder. Peter didn't hesitate. He pulled out another set of documents. Official termination papers legally signed, sealed by the interim board. He has no legal authority over company assets. If he's accessed anything, it's theft. I swallowed hard, fists clenched. So I can freeze the accounts? Not only can you should do it immediately. We completed the procedures that same day. The internal account freeze order was sent to the company's bank. The management system passwords were changed, Ethan's email was deactivated, and an internal notice was issued. Lily Marshall is the legal chief executive officer of Marshall Glass. That evening, I returned to the Grayson estate, the place I never truly called home. My mother-in-law, Violet, sat by the window, clutching an old shawl. I walked over and whispered, "I'll be moving out, but, if you'd like, I can make arrangements for you to come with me." She didn't answer right away, but her eyes glistened. Finally she said softly, "You're the only one left who still treats me like family." As we packed, the door suddenly burst open. Ethan stood there, face flushed, fists clenched, eyes burning. "What the hell did you do?" I looked him straight in the eye, unshaken. "I took back what was mine to begin with." He stumbled forward, shouting, "The company account is frozen, the password doesn't work, you have no right to do this." I looked straight at him. "I am the legal CEO, my father terminated you before he passed, everything you've done since means nothing." Ethan was speechless. A moment later, he roared like a wounded animal. "You're a fraud, you've taken everything from me, and now you want to take my mother too?" Mrs. Violet stood up. Slowly but firmly. "No, Ethan, I chose to go with Lily, because at least, she lives with honesty." Ethan gave me one last look, full of hatred. "I'll sue you, I'll take everything back." I didn't respond. I turned to Violet. "Let's go." We left that house, carrying nothing but the memories that needed to be packed away and buried. And the moment I stepped through the heavy iron gates, I knew. The power game Ethan thought he was winning was over. Just 3 days after officially taking over Marshall Glass, I sat alone in the 8th floor boardroom, where my father had spent nearly 2 decades. Light slanted through the glass panels, casting shadows on the empty chair beside me. His chair. "I won't let you down," I whispered, gripping the fountain pen he once used. I knew I wasn't a perfect CEO. I was young, had never studied business management, didn't have an MBA like people expected, but I had something they didn't: legacy. And the will to survive. I immediately contacted Tom Brewster, a business advisor who had worked with the New Light Foundation. A man of few words but sharp insight, Tom understood I needed a partner, not a controller. "You need someone to hold the wheel in the storm." And I brought the life vest, he said dryly, as he accepted the role of deputy CEO. We reviewed every investment Ethan had approved, freezing all high-risk transactions. I met with the entire HR department and made it clear, every position would now be evaluated by merit, not by any connection to the Grayson name. Some people left, some stayed. But the company began to breathe again. At the same time, I never gave up on the New Light Foundation. In the evenings, after everyone had gone home, I stayed behind, working through stacks of grant proposals and planning scholarship programs for children who had survived cancer and wanted to return to school. Whenever I felt exhausted, I thought back to those mornings in the hospital. Those tiny hands gripping mine. Those trusting eyes looking up at me, as if I really could save the world. And strangely, it was those children who pulled me out of the deepest pain. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Violet, moved in with me into a small 2-story house on the south side of Stamford. Nothing fancy, no bodyguards, no gold-plated furniture. But it had a little garden, a rocking chair on the porch, and 2 cups of hot tea every afternoon. As time passed, she grew weaker. The cancer had spread to her liver. But she never once complained. One evening in March, as I was mending the wool scarf she liked to wear outside, she called me over, clutching a faded silver-blue notebook. "Do you know why I used to hate you?" she asked, her voice raspy, eyes gazing into nothing. I froze, said nothing. She went on. "Because you reminded me too much of everything I never had. Strength. Courage. The freedom to choose. Things I lost the moment I signed my name to marry Charles." I placed my hand over hers, saying nothing. I didn't need to. She handed me the notebook. Inside was a handwritten will, signed and notarized. All personal assets, including the Grayson estate, savings accounts and art ownership, are hereby transferred to Lily Marshall, the only person in my life who lived with kindness, not for status. I cried. Not for the assets, but because I was seen. Finally, I was truly seen. 2 weeks later, Violet passed away in her sleep, peacefully, without pain. I sat by her bed until morning, holding her hand the way she used to hold mine, when she still had the strength. Her funeral was small and private. Ethan didn't come. But I wasn't surprised. News of Ethan's downfall spread through the industry within a week. After his accounts were frozen and he lost all power at Grayson and Associates, he tried to contact former investors, attempting to salvage what little credibility he had left. No one answered. His new girlfriend, a young model named Serena, left him right after she found out the penthouse in Brooklyn was in Mrs. Violet's name and now legally belonged to me. Ethan called me. Just once. "Lily, I know you're enjoying this." I replied calmly. "I don't need to enjoy it, Ethan. You pushed yourself to the bottom. I'm just not lifting you out again." He went quiet for a moment, then hung up. I never heard from him again. 2 years later, Marshall Glass had grown by 17%, becoming the third largest glass contractor in the New England region. The New Light Foundation opened 2 new branches in Albany and Providence. A hospital in New Haven even named its children's playroom the Lily Grayson Room. A name I never imagined would carry something so positive. I sat in my new office, sunlight filtering through the flawless glass, the very kind my company now produced. I smiled. My parents would be proud. And me? I was finally proud of myself. And the best part? I didn't have to sacrifice love to achieve it. I only had to choose the right moment. To let go of what was no longer worthy. From a forced marriage and years of being dismissed, Lily stepped out of the shadows through sheer strength and unwavering will. She not only reclaimed her father's company, but built a foundation that spread love to thousands of children. Through loss, betrayal and heartbreak, she discovered her true worth. A brave, kind and dignified woman. Lily's story proves that true strength comes from letting go of what no longer deserves a place in your life. What do you think about Lily's journey? What would you do in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more inspiring stories about family and life.